from Russia, powering businesses, heating homes. Plant spokesperson Nicola Regensberger says it's a critical supply. This plant is particularly important for Europe, she tells me. The gas reaches millions of households through Germany and further into the European gas network. And all the while it flows in from the west, money heads back the other way. Every single day, Europe pays Russia hundreds of millions of pounds for its oil and gas. In fact, since the invasion began, Germany alone has paid a total of nearly £7.5 billion, effectively financing the war in Ukraine. Everyone agrees that eventually that has to stop. But the question now is how fast and on whose terms?
We do have problems if the energy will be cut off or would be cut off. Then we are dead. We can't produce anymore.
Above all, Thomas Dreusiker fears a sudden disruption in supply. If Vladimir Putin turns off the gas, as he has done elsewhere, rationing could follow and his plastic mouldings company would be done for. As long as that doesn't happen, he can take the pain of rising energy prices.
We were founded in 1929, which was the biggest economic crisis. And we survived World War II and some other crises in the last decades. And I think there will be a life after Putin or after this crisis, 100%.
His employees can't afford to be as confident.
Just with what is going on, prices of cost of living is getting high, not only energy. Food prices, oil, everything, petrol, the situation getting hard.
That's what Germany's government is focused on. It fears a recession if its heavy reliance on Russian gas is reduced too quickly. Yes. Even the climate change envoy agrees. If getting off Russian fossil fuels is so critical, why can't Germany do it faster?
Germany is moving as fast as we possibly can to get off fossil fuels. You're seeing that in the phase out of coal. You're seeing that with moving forward on oil, and we're moving as fast as we can on gas. But we need to be doing that in a balanced way that also makes sure that Germany is a stable and balanced place.
According to government critics, these issues were largely avoidable.
The problem is that Germany is the only industrialized country in the world that is simultaneously phasing out nuclear power and coal power. We have simply narrowed the supply of energy too much and are now in this situation where we are dependent.
And some are warning that even if Europe could agree on a Russian gas embargo, it might not even work.
We need to remind ourselves the Russian central bank still has 300 billion in foreign reserves, a lot of that in the form of gold in the cellar. So this can be spent, which means a short-term impact on the war is relatively unlikely.
No good options apparently available as Germany's moral and economic dilemma continues and the war in Ukraine rumbles on. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News in Berlin.
And you can watch more of Hannah's interview with Germany's climate envoy, Jennifer Morgan. That will be on the show for you tomorrow. Now, the World Health Organization believes the 2020 coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan, China, most likely started after the virus was transmitted from bats to humans via another species. Well, now, in a new report, scientists forecast that by 2070, thousands of viruses are likely to be transmitted between different species. That is largely as a result of a warming planet. Well, our science correspondent Thomas Moore joins us now. Hello there, Thomas. Does this mean that we're going to be looking at more pandemics coming our way?
Well, certainly not long ago, a new pandemic virus spreading from wild animals to humans would have been seen as the stuff of Hollywood, but COVID has shown us the threat is very real and it could happen again. This research suggests there's likely to be at least 15,000 instances of viruses spreading between species by the year 2070, driven by climate change. And according to the study published in the journal Nature, even just 2 degrees of warming survival for some species will mean moving hundreds of kilometres to cooler or more stable environments. And that will bring them up close with animals they've never been in contact with before, a perfect scenario for transmission of viruses from one to the other. And of course, with agriculture expanding and urban areas too, people are coming into closer contact with wild animals, raising the risk of what scientists called zoonotic spillover. That's when these viruses spread into the human population. Now, there's thought to be 10,000 viruses circulating in wild animals that are largely unseen, but could infect humans. So what to do? Well, the researchers say there's two things. One is to carefully monitor the movement of animals, particularly in high-risk tropical areas of Africa and Southeast Asia. But also, they say, we need close surveillance of novel viruses that do have pandemic potential.
All right, Thomas, thank you. Frightening stuff. Well, let's get caught up on some of the day's other climate news now. And climate activists damaged petrol pumps and they stopped motorists from entering forecourts at several motorway service stations this morning. More than 30 supporters of Just Stop Oil took part in those protests that took place across Surrey and Kent. The group has been demonstrating since the 1st of April. They say they will continue the disruption until the government promises to stop new oil and gas projects in the UK. A report by a global forest monitoring project has found that the world lost an area of forest the size of the American state of Wyoming in 2021. Global Forest Watch said that over 97,000 square miles of forest was destroyed last year, with wildfires in Russia and deforestation of the Brazilian Amazon causing significant losses. Last year, remember, at COP26 in Glasgow, more than 100 world leaders pledged to halt deforestation by 2030. Now, heatwave warnings have been issued across India as the country swelters under unusually early and extended extreme temperatures. Well, although heat waves are common in India during the summer, the high temperatures began much earlier than usual this year, with the warmest March in 122 years. The capital, New Delhi, hit 43.5 degrees today. Can you imagine? Its hottest April temperature in more than a decade. The United Nations has warned that heat waves and humidity-related heat stress are likely to intensify across South Asia if more isn't done to tackle climate change. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Arpita Mondal, an Associate Professor at the Department of Civil Engineering and Climate Studies at the Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai. Hello there to you, Professor. It's hard enough, isn't it, to cope with extreme temperatures like this if you have access to air conditioning and running water, but many of the people affected in India won't have either of those.
You're very right. And, our nation is in a developing state. The nation is being built. There's a lot of construction happening. And those constructions rely on daily wage workers who, if they don't show up at work at the end of the day, they're not going to eat anything. So they don't really have a choice to stay indoors. And unfortunately, these are the communities who are really vulnerable to the deadly effects of the heat wave, along with, of course, the elderly population, children, and people with comorbidities. So you are very right. Most of India do not have access to air conditioning, or in fact, there is not much public awareness on how to tackle with these heat waves. How much should you hydrate? How many hours should you stay outdoors? We have a lot to do in building public awareness in that regard.
Now, these heat waves are coming earlier, they're more widespread. It's a confluence of factors, isn't it, that has brought these earlier heat waves. What are they?
I think the single most important factor is, of course, anthropogenic greenhouse gases and aerosol-induced climate change. We have the distribution of temperatures shifting, and when you have the distributions of temperatures shifting, there is higher and higher chances of having extremes such as these. In that background, climate change, there are also meteorological and synoptic scale factors. There are conditions in the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, which can also influence Indian heat wave conditions, lack of pre-monsoon showers because of lower rainfall from the western disturbances, and generally what are called anticyclones, which is basically a large area of high pressure sitting on the land, leading to subsidence, so there's no movement of air, and there is also a feedback from the dry soils because of low pre-monsoon rainfall. So all of these factors are playing a role. However, we can say with the scientific community has overwhelming evidence to conclude that climate change plays a role in making these events more intense, more frequent, and also of longer durations.
Dr. Mondal, really good to talk to you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Do stay with us. Coming up, I'll be joined by Honorary Fellow at Oxford's Environmental Change Institute, Dr. Cece Hugh, and Richard Black, who is founder of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. We're going to be discussing Germany's reliance on Russian fossil fuels and whether global health systems are ready for a warming world.
I was sitting on a sofa watching the telly and knitting, and my husband said, "I think I've got some good news for you." And he turned his laptop round and showed me a picture of a lottery ticket. And I said, "Oh, well, if you're saying it's good news, it must be more than £2.50. And he said, "Yeah, a bit." I said, so what is it?" And he said, "No, we've won." I said, "No, what have we won? I don't know." So he told me, and I think for the first time in my life, I was dumbfounded. I was shocked, and I had nothing to say. So we stared at each other for about 5 minutes, stood up, gave each other a hug, and I said, "I'll go and put the kettle on, shall I?" We've never worked so hard either. My daughter, every time I complain that I'm tired or I'm fed up or she said, "Talk to the hand. You could be lying on a beach somewhere doing nothing." Doesn't want to hear. So she makes a joke of it. To be fair, I'm kind of surprised because I just assumed everybody would do that. Patrick said to me, he always said if we won the lottery, he would never let me open an email or answer a phone again because I'd just give it all away. It's just in my nature, I think. And he turned around at night and he said to me, "Right, that's too much money. A lot of money. You can make your list now." And he gave me a pen and a piece of paper and told me to make my list. My sister was just about to lose her house, and that saved that. My nephew was able to buy my mother's house that we all grew up in, and he lives in that now, which was lovely. That's family stories. Friends. I mean, we had one friend, we took them out for dinner, and it was had a little private dining room, and he got up and he ran around the table whooping and throwing his napkin around his head. We had another friend who just put his head in his hands and cried when we told him. The family and friends thing was amazing. I mean, I've been in tears so many times. The other gifts and bits and pieces, I set up the Kathleen Graham Trust in Northern Ireland after my mother, and I set up the PFC Trust in Hartlepool, which is Patrick and Frances Conley, and that was to help me.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. We're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day with Honorary Fellow at Oxford's Environmental Change Institute, Dr. Cece Hugh, and Richard Black, who is founder of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Really good to see both of you. Now, after Russia cut off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria this week, there are big questions for Germany, Europe's industrial powerhouse and hugely reliant on fossil fuel imports from Russia. Well, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, on a visit to Japan, defended the ongoing trade. Richard, let me come to you first, because the Chancellor also put some detail around the plan to reduce the reliance on Russian fossil fuels, didn't he? What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, it's clearly something that's in an evolutionary state. So obviously they've been talking about this since the beginning of the war, and they've been looking for various things that they can do And really, it's a bit of everything. So it's energy efficiency, and it's turning down the thermostat, and it's building out renewables faster and trying to get supplies of gas from other countries. More coal is going to be burnt, I think, certainly next winter. So it's a bit of all of the above. One of the things that's often missing from this discussion, though, is that the energy sector is actually private sector operated. And so we tend to think in terms of governments talking to other governments and thinking about what can they do. But of course, all around Germany, the individual companies, that whether they're refineries, whether they're people that sell petrol, whether they're the utilities that burn gas, they'll be trying to see what they can do as well. And as this all unfolds, I think the picture is going to become clearer, over the next few months.
Yeah, you make a very good point there, and it does often get overlooked, doesn't it? Cece, the higher price that we've seen over the last few weeks of gas and oil means that a case can be made for renewables that isn't just about climate goals.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the Ukraine crisis really has highlighted the fact that, relying on a single supplier of fossil gas isn't the best way to go. And there is a huge need for diversification. It is fortunate that we, live in a world where there are alternatives to fossil fuels. So the higher energy prices, as you correctly pointed out, can make investment in renewable energy more attractive and profitable, and therefore giving us an opportunity really to act now and undergo a rapid transition, a clean energy transition, which is required for mitigating climate risks.
Richard, factory owners who were speaking to our climate change correspondent said that they would happily take the financial pain to move their business away from Russia because of the principle of it. But they can't do that indefinitely, can they?
No, they can't do it indefinitely, and of course they've got their workforces to think about as well. I mean,
many of whom don't support what they're doing.
Well, it would be a test, wouldn't it, of how solid that support actually was. Germany, there's a lot of talk, obviously, about what would happen if Russia did turn off the taps. I think currently it looks unlikely that it will, and that's the government's belief as well, partly because German firms seem to be prepared to make payments on the conditions that Russia has specified, whereas that wasn't the case with Poland and Bulgaria. But it is a possibility that it would happen, and it would certainly be very interesting. It would definitely spur the movement to renewables and the increase in energy efficiency, I think, much more. And of course, when companies are in that situation, they then have to adapt. But I think what Cece was saying earlier, I completely agree with that. There were already so many reasons for moving to renewables and increasing energy efficiency. It's cheaper, you don't have climate change, you reduce air pollution, and you increase the jobs. Well, what this is really showing us is if you want security of supply, if you really want to be able to guarantee energy to your citizens, and you want to be able to enact a foreign policy that is free of blackmail from other countries over energy, you have to go down the clean energy route.
Yeah, Cece, I mean, we've been talking about renewables, but what about nuclear? And will the countries who've typically shied away from it have to look again?
Yeah, I think I would like to come back to the point about the need for diversification and the need for the transition to, renewable energy, because you can't just rely on a single source. Nuclear is part of the picture, but we should have a very good mix of energy sources so that this kind of stuff doesn't happen again.
Richard, is Germany ever likely to change its view on nuclear power? I mean, the Greens oppose it, and they're now part of the ruling coalition.
Yes, I think the thing is with Germany, it spent a long time as the frontline state in a possible nuclear conflict. Germany was, of course, two countries until 1989, East Germany in the Soviet bloc, West Germany in the NATO bloc, and nuclear missiles on the soils of both countries pointed at each other. That's left quite a legacy on the national psyche. In the West, they also felt very personally, I think, the lying about the Chernobyl disaster that came from the Soviet Union. So because all of that, there is definitely, you know, a powerful public opinion against nuclear. But the other thing about nuclear is it takes a long time to build. The government did look at keeping open the 3 remaining nuclear power stations that are supposed to close at the end of the year, and there were various problems over safety inspections, fuel availability, employees, that kind of thing. They probably could have done it with enough effort. But if you're talking about restarting, building new nuclear reactors, you're not going to see the first electrons flowing out of that probably for a decade. So it definitely can't solve the crisis that we have now.
Yeah, countries need to think about their short-term and their longer-term planning, don't they? Let's take another look at the other story that we were featuring this evening. We were hearing earlier that a warming world will lead to a huge increase in the transmission of viruses from animals to humans. It's really quite a terrifying thought, isn't it, Cece, in case we wanted any more depressing news. What is the link between climate change and viruses?
So we know that global temperatures are rising. That's a fact. When temperatures rise, animals and plants will have to adjust their behavior and movements to survive. Because they carry diseases, therefore there is an increased risk of them moving around and, giving the diseases to us humans. I think the fundamental question here is whether our global healthcare system is resilient enough. Is it strong enough to take another pandemic, for example, or is it, strong enough to take even smaller outbreaks of diseases? In the UK, 37% of our healthcare workers are severely burnt out right now, and thousands of them. Yes, it's really quite bad, and thousands of them are thinking of leaving the NHS, and actually more than 4 in 10 GPs who quit the NHS quit because of burnout. So I'm really concerned that climate change will put more pressure on an already very vulnerable system, and this is a developed country, right? And because it's gone through COVID, and what happens, to the global healthcare system, especially the ones in developing countries who are going through this and going through more disease and outbreaks, it's very concerning.
Richard, if we see how one virus brought health systems around the world to its knees, the percentage of GDP that countries spend on health, we're going to have to radically up that, aren't we?
Yes, I think we are. And I think we're also going to have to get much better at cooperating with each other, because in the COVID pandemic, governments really did go it alone. We saw vaccine nationalism and hoarding of vaccines and things like this, and basically a reluctance to commit to the WHO's COVAX fund, for example. And that's not going to work if we're going to have more and more pandemics coming along. I thought this was a really interesting study, by the way. This is something I'd not really thought of, but it does put together 2 well-known facts in science. One is that diseases do jump from animals to humans. I mean, there's nothing new about that. Go back to the days of the plague that was happening. But of course, we also know that climate change is driving migration of species. It's well documented by IPCC reports, and you do have groups of animals that have existed together, perhaps in a predator-prey relationship or something like this. One of them may migrate faster than the other one. So what happens? What happens to that ecosystem? Can it survive? But this point about diseases is newly made, and of course potentially they could jump from animals straight to humans, but potentially they could jump from one species to another one and thence to humans. So lots and lots of unknowns in this one.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing stuff, isn't it? Well, that's all we've got time for. Dr. Cece Hu and Richard Black, thank you very much for your time on Sky News' Daily Climate Show. Now, on the show tomorrow, we're going to be joined by the Director of Policy and Translation at the Grantham Institute, Alyssa Gilbert, and James Streeter, who is chair of the Interclimate Network. But do stay with us here on Sky News, because coming up, Beth Rigby interviews tonight Fiona Hill, former Senior Director for European and Russian Affairs on the US National Security Council. She's also going to be talking to the former First Lady of South Africa, Graça Machel, and the Ofsted Chief Inspector, Amanda Spielman. For now, thank you for watching and hope to see you next time.